This is a 3CR podcast produced in the studios of independent community radio station 3CR in Melbourne, Australia. Go to allthews.3cr.org.au.
Welcome to a place where private business profit from a captive labour force, yet pennies are spent on medical services to a population in which the Indigenous, the poor and the mentally ill are overrepresented. Where isolation, humiliation and degradation are facts of life. Welcome to prison.
It depends who's telling the story, I suppose. The prisoners would have one view, the people who work in the prison system would have another, and I think it's up to people to decide where the truth is.
Give government propaganda and the media spin doctors the flick. And check out Doin Time for news, views and tunes on prison issues from Guantanamo Bay to Christmas Island to prisons and detention centres everywhere. Every Monday at 4 p.m. on your community radio 3CR.
We are still fired up and we're still talking about revolution.
Hello and welcome to the Doin Time show. This is 3CR Community Radio, 855 AM on the dial, streaming live on www.3cr.org.au. This is Marisa and I'll be taking you through until 5 o'clock this evening. And a warning that this episode of Doin Time will contain audio images of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who have died and graphic discussions of inquests. First up on the show, we will be bringing you a pre-recorded interview with Sarah Schwartz and giving a continuation of the discussion that we were having last week in regards to inquests, Aboriginal deaths in custody and the horrors of the parole system and how that impacts on deaths in custody. And one of the Indigenous women that we were talking about was Heather Calgaret and what happened to her and how she died. Sarah is from the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service and she manages the Wirraway Police and Prison Accountability Practice, which is based at that organisation, and she's a lecturer at Melbourne Law School. After that, I will be reading some extracts from a report. Is the response to a formal response to the Disability Royal Commission from People with Disability Australia. We were meant to interview the President, but she has become ill, so a shout out to her. So going straight into Sarah's interview.
Hello Sarah, welcome to the program. Lovely to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me back. Thanks for having me back, Marisa.
It's definitely going to be a continuation of the discussion from last week, and we talked a lot about the parole system. We didn't have much time because it was towards the end of the show, but you managed to actually speak in a little bit of detail about prison healthcare and the parole system. So let's start from the beginning. Perhaps it would be useful at this point for you to just give a little bit of a brief overview of the practice that you work for.
Yeah, sure. So I head up the Wirraway Police and Prison Accountability Practice at the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service. We work on police and prison accountability matters, including with people who've suffered from violence at the hands of police and human rights abuses in prisons. And we also represent a number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families who've lost their loved ones in police or prison custody.
And, of course, we had the directions hearing of Heather Calgaret, who died in custody at Sunshine Hospital in November 2021. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so Heather Calgaret was a proud Yamatji, Noongar, Wongi and Pitjantjatjara woman. She has left behind a large family who have given statements, which I'd urge anyone to read, speaking about how she loved her culture, enjoyed painting and writing and had an amazing sense of humour and was the rock of her family. Heather passed away at Sunshine Hospital, as you say, in November 2021, after she'd been found in a critical condition at Dame Phyllis Frost Centre prison by her sister Suzanne. Heather had been in custody at Dame Phyllis Frost Centre and had been eligible for parole since the December 2020. and she submitted a parole application well before she was eligible, but was denied parole in October 2021. The coroner last week determined the scope for the coronial inquest, and that inquest will begin on the 29th of April, and that inquest will look at the quality and cultural appropriateness of the healthcare that Heather received, including whether an 8 milligram dose of buprenorphine that she received the day before she was found unconscious contributed to her passing. And it will also look at, the overall quality of the healthcare that she received in prison. Her family have a number of concerns, including that she gained a really large amount of weight in prison and suffered a number of other medical conditions. So the court's going to look at the quality of her healthcare, particularly given what the inquest into the passing of Veronica Nelson, which their findings were handed down last year. And we know that also really spoke about the quality of prison healthcare. So the family, that's going to be examined in the inquest. And the inquest is also going to look into the process of Heather's parole application, which is one of the first times, to our understanding, the first time that the Victorian Coroner's Court has looked at the parole process, since there were these dramatic changes to the parole system almost a decade ago.
So the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, the recommendations, and I believe there were 339 of them, haven't really been upheld. How could those recommendations be applied to Heather Calgaret?
So the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody made, as you say, a large range of recommendations, all the way from, addressing over-policing and targeting of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander by police to, alternatives for the justice system, and also looking into this exact thing, the quality of healthcare provided to people in custody. We see and we know from recent reports that have been done that even today, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who passed away in custody are 3 times as likely to not receive all required medical care compared to non-Indigenous people, and Aboriginal women were less likely to receive appropriate medical care before their passing compared to Aboriginal men. And really, statistics like that should have forced the government into action long ago, and Heather Calgaret may still be here if they took that crisis seriously. We know that the Royal Commission made recommendations, saying that the healthcare that people receive in prison has to be of the same standard that people receive in the community, and also made recommendations saying that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in prison should be able to access Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health services, which they have access to in the community. And still in Victoria, we don't have, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in prison don't have a right to get health care from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health services, from health organisations. And, we still say that the healthcare that is provided to people in prison is well below the standard of that provided in the community, and that is contributing to deaths in custody.
Thank you so much for letting us know about that. That's something that certainly is not covered a lot in mainstream media to discuss this in so much detail. The other thing is, unlike Heather Calgaret, the inquest of Veronica Nelson concluded a long time ago. Are you able to talk about her death in custody, and we could look at the parole system and how that affected it, and look at prison healthcare?
Yeah. So Veronica Nelson was born on the 3rd of March 1982 in Dandenong, and she passed away at the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre, the same prison that Heather passed away at, on the 2nd of January 2020, after, as many listeners would have heard, after days of crying out for help. She was only in prison for 3 days. She'd been arrested on the 30th of December 2019 for shoplifting-related offences, and then she appeared in court not represented by a lawyer and was refused bail under Victoria's really harsh bail laws, and then entered Dame Phyllis Frost Centre and was very, very unwell. She buzzed the intercom buzzer that was in her room approximately 49 times, asking for help, and in the end crying out for help. And the vast majority of those calls were ignored or dismissed. I've had the real privilege of working for for over 3 years with Veronica's life partner, Uncle Percy Lovett, who was a joint senior next of kin in the coronial inquest into her passing, with Veronica's mother, Auntie Donna Nelson.
Yeah, well, I actually tuned into quite a bit of that inquest via live streaming, and it was horrific, the footage of how she was crying out. And people watching, the staff were watching movies, if you please.
It's so horrific, and that the family, endured sitting in the court and listening to that footage and seeking truth for Veronica. No family should have to go through that. No family should have their loved one die in custody, not in community, not with them. And, the coronial inquest into her death, the coroner found that her death was preventable and that, she could have been saved by any one of the number of people who were in charge who she'd asked for help. The coroner found, and experts gave evidence in the inquest that Veronica really needed to go to hospital as soon as she entered prison. She passed away from withdrawal from opiates and Wilkie's syndrome in the setting of malnutrition. And what that means is she could have been saved by something as simple as an intravenous drip. And the coroner made absolutely damning findings about the quality of prison healthcare. And one of the things that always strikes me about Veronica's inquest, about, the way that Veronica passed away, was just how many people could have intervened to prevent her from having passed away in custody. She was failed at almost every level, from the time that she was arrested by a police officer who recognised her and then refused bail when, she didn't need to be in custody. She shouldn't have been refused bail. No one should be refused bail for offences like shoplifting. And then to entering prison, not having, any culturally appropriate support or care, and for, her frequent cries for help being ignored and dismissed. And, I guess there's, it's not only sort of these really cruel circumstances in which Veronica died, but also the fact that her story has been repeated time and time again. We've heard stories going back to the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, which examined the deaths of Aboriginal women like Nita Blanket, who passed away in custody after their cries for help were ignored or dismissed. And so we know that, these issues in prisons have been going on for so long, and are really contributed to by systemic racism and by, the violence of the prison system itself.
And then, of course, we've got Michael Suckling, the inquest has been concluded, but findings are still, we're still awaiting findings, so we can speak about very generally. Is that right?
Yeah. So Michael Suckling, also an Aboriginal man who passed away in custody. He passed away in March 2021 at Ravenhall Correctional Centre, and his inquest was last year, and it looked into, the adequacy and cultural appropriateness of the healthcare that he received in prison. And, really concerningly, Michael weighed 199 kilograms when he died, and he had weighed only 82 kilograms in 2018 when he first entered custody. So, the inquest explored what healthcare he was provided in custody, whether he was provided with appropriate healthcare both as an Aboriginal man and as someone with significant chronic healthcare needs. That inquest looked into, what the prison system is like and how the prison system failed Michael in so many different ways. And, his family is still waiting for the coroner's court to deliver findings in that inquest.
Sarah, this is actually a very informative way to look at things, to be able to talk about it, because one of the things that's important is for these things not to happen again. But there's a reoccurring theme here, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. To see so many Aboriginal people die in custody, after being policed, targeted by police, passing away, after not receiving the health care that they need in prison. It just really shows the systemic violence of the prison system, and also the systemic racism within the prison system and within the overall criminal legal system. The fact that Aboriginal people, like Veronica, are targeted by police, are recognised by police, and arrested for minor offences. And then also, the fact that their cries for help are ignored in custody, that they don't receive the health care that they need. And, then going on to, what Heather experienced, the parole system, we know that, currently Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women in Victoria are the only group whose numbers in prison are increasing out of other demographics. And, we know that so many, that the parole system, the hardening of parole laws has so disproportionately impacted Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women who aren't able to have access to parole, for things like not having access to programs and housing. And no one should be in prison, just because they can't get access to housing or because they can't get access to a program that the prison system is meant to provide them. It's just, adding to levels of unfairness that the families that I work with have to grapple with every day.
Absolutely. Now, there is another inquest here. Is it Marisa Cash?
Yeah, Marisa Cash. Marisa Cash, so a proud Aboriginal woman who passed away. She had called the police for help, and police took over an hour to arrive at her house to help her, and she passed away in the interim while waiting for police to help. With her family, her brother Matthew Cash, who I've been really privileged to work with, has been fighting for justice for her. We're still waiting for those inquest findings as well. That inquest finalised last year. We're waiting for findings and answers for her family. And again, we know that Aboriginal women's cries for help, for assistance from the police are more likely to be ignored, and that, police are really poor responders to mental health crises and don't, have the skills or training, or, their jobs aren't set up to deal with mental health crises, but they are often the first responders, and they often fail to meet the needs of people suffering mental health crises, who might be ignored or left, or who might rather be over-policed or arrested when they're actually suffering a mental health crisis.
And you also mentioned at the end of last week's interview the foundation. Of course, we cannot forget Aunty Tanya Day, who died a horrible death in custody, didn't she? Yeah,
absolutely. And Aunty Tanya Day's family have done so much to fight for justice for her, and that was made evident when we saw the passing of laws that finally, years after her passing, decriminalised public intoxication. And her family have been fighting for those changes to laws for years. The first laws where public intoxication has not only been decriminalised, but police haven't been given any new powers, which means that police aren't given any new powers to deal, or to arrest people who they say are drunk in public. And we know that our clients at the Aboriginal Legal Service are more likely to be impacted or disproportionately arrested under public intoxication laws. And police are simply not best placed to deal with what is a health crisis. And
no.
so it's really important that those powers have now been given over to healthcare providers. And Auntie Tanya Day's daughter, April Day, has started the Darjawa Foundation, which I mentioned last week, they work tirelessly with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families who've lost their loved ones in custody, provide support to them, provide advocacy and media assistance. You know, I know that they're at the moment in the NT supporting the family of Kumanjai Walker, and have just been doing so much work for the families of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who've passed away in custody, and it is just such important work. So if anyone listening, a really easy way that you can assist is by donating to the Darjawa Foundation, who do so much.
And you can Google that?
Yes, you Google that.
Beautiful. And there's a burning question that I've always wanted to ask about what happened with Veronica Nelson, and that is, and I think this actually came up in the inquest during the time that the findings were being delivered, that Veronica Nelson should not have been in prison. It was just a petty shoplifting. It wasn't a crime. And if she was white, had she been white, I wonder if she would have been released. And then none of this would have happened. Is there not stigma and systemic racism?
I would say that there is. The coroner in Veronica's inquest found that the bail laws operate discriminately against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, but he didn't make findings about racism and systemic racism. And
that's right.
That is something that Veronica's family, had fought for. And, we presented the court with evidence from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander experts who said that, exactly what you said, Marisa, that Veronica wouldn't have been treated in the same way if she was not Aboriginal. We heard from women in prison in her inquest. Kylie Evans, one of the women who was in prison with Veronica, gave evidence about the way that healthcare providers, treat Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women and treat drug users as well, and the stigma that's attached to that. And we heard evidence in the inquest from Dr. Amanda Porter, from Megan Williams, two Aboriginal experts who gave evidence about racism and systemic racism as it affected Veronica. And, I guess I would really, the thing I would say about that is we can't only rely on coroner's courts to, tell narratives about how loved ones, how, people passed away in custody. Veronica's family, Uncle Percy Lovett, Auntie Donna Nelson have both spoken about the racism that Veronica experienced, and they are the narrators of her story. And we can still speak about, the racism in the systems that, in the bail system, in the prison healthcare system, in all these systems that impacted Veronica. I do not think that Veronica would have passed away in custody if she wasn't Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. And, I think that racism was a strong part of why she was in custody in the first place. And as you say, she just shouldn't have been in custody. She didn't pose any risk to any, the physical safety of any person. And we see at the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service, and, listeners and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities know that they are targeted by police, arrested, and put in prison when we would all be a lot safer if people were in community with their loved ones.
And finally, in regards to the parole system, how can that be modified, if you like, although I don't know how we're going to do that under capitalism, but how can that be reformed to prevent deaths in custody?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, the first step in the parole system is that currently the Victorian parole system is really uniquely opaque. The decisions that are made by the Adult Parole Board are exempt from the rules of natural justice. They don't have to comply with the Charter of Human Rights. They don't have to comply with procedural fairness. People aren't even entitled to legal representation. They don't know how decisions are made. There's no right of review. And so, one first step is that people need to have access to legal representation, to natural justice and to human rights in that process. But the government also really needs to reverse so many of those harsh changes to the parole system. You know, these changes were made after a series of high-profile murders, but then what we see is that, you know, it's affecting everyday people in prison and has meant that just so many people don't have access to parole, like Heather Calgaret. You know, no one should be denied parole for lack of housing, and that's really important. The Victorian government needs to invest in public housing, needs to take money out of prisons and invest in housing. It's just, you know, outrageous to me, the fact that the government is willing to spend so much money letting people languish behind bars, spending so much more money than they would if they actually invested that money in, you know, public housing and in communities which can provide supports and services. It just doesn't make anyone safer to have people behind bars. You know, and these other changes that were made to the parole system, you know, over a decade ago, you know, putting the burden onto people to seek parole, you know, having a lack of access to automatic parole, and really, really long delays in the parole system. We know that so many recent deaths in custody have been people who've passed away in custody whilst waiting for parole. You know, some of them people who've been passed away in custody while waiting for their parole application to be determined. And so, you know, the system is in need of urgent review. If we really want to think about decarceration, about making communities safer by having, you know, less and less people in prisons, then we need to look at parole. It's really the next system after the bail laws, you know, unfairly meant that Veronica Nelson passed away in custody. We now need to look at the parole laws and policies and see and push for changes to those laws and policies, which are meaning that people stay in custody.
Sarah, thank you so much for providing such refreshing coverage of these inquests, and it's so important to really look at things historically as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Really important for that to happen. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me, Marisa. Yeah. You know, as I said before, it's so important that shows like yours keep spreading the message of what people in custody are experiencing, because we know that governments and policymakers so often ignore those really important stories. So thank you for your work.
I know that's okay, and it's just lovely to have lawyers on the show. I don't know if you remember Uncle Ray Jackson, who was the president in New South Wales. He was amazing, wasn't
he? Yeah, incredible.
I really miss him. All right, well, thank you so much, Sarah, and I'm sure we'll be connecting again.
Thanks so much, Marisa. I really appreciate it.
Keep up the good work. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And that was Sarah Schwartz from the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service, and she was talking about deaths in custody and the horrors of the parole system.
What do you have to say for yourself? What is it you gotta say? I just heard you busting about it just the other day. You seem to have your wires crossed and you're doing it all wrong. Try to just stay focused about yourself and just be strong. Build a bridge and you'll be on your way. Get over it. Get over it. You don't have to tell me what it is that's on your mind. I can feel the frustration. Here it's brewing all the time. Heaven only knows what waiting for stuck here in the rain. Build a bridge and you'll be on your way. Hey, get over it. Get over it. Build a bridge and you'll be on your way. Get over it. Things are lying your way. Well, I walk the walk, talk the talk. That's the games that I play. Instead of telling me, baby, what do you believe is true? You better listen close, oh baby, oh yeah, I got news for you. Build a bridge and you'll be on your way. Hey, get over it. Get over it. I said build a bridge and you'll be on your way. Get over it. Get over it. I said build a bridge and you'll be on your way. Get over it.
The law is part of our everyday lives, including when we buy something, use a service, have a job, or rent a house. The law can be used to help protect and support families when there is violence in the home or disputes over parenting arrangements. Sometimes we might need to understand the law to navigate specific government systems like Centrelink, getting a residency visa, or if we come into contact with the police. Community legal centres provide free, quality legal advice and assistance to help people with everyday legal problems. We focus on working with people who are experiencing disadvantage, such as financial hardship, family violence, homelessness, and discrimination. Community legal centres are independent, non-government organisations and can be found across Victoria and Australia. If you're experiencing a legal problem, your local community legal centre may be able to help. To find a community legal centre near you, visit the Federation of Community Legal Centres Victoria at www.fclc.org.au. A 3CR supporter.
Get ready for 3CR's unique broadcast for International Women's Day on Friday, 8th of March. Solidarity radio you won't hear anywhere else. No wishy-washy themes or corporate double-speak here, just 24 hours of grassroots radical discussions, current affairs, spoken word and music by women and gender non-conforming presenters, producers and musicians. We're talking midnight to midnight, Friday, 8th of March. Head to the 3CR website for all the details.
And you're back with the Doin Time show, and it's approximately 4:34, and you just heard a song and a couple of announcements as well, but previously there was a song called Get Over It by Emma Donovan, beautiful Indigenous musician. And as I said before, previously you heard an interview with, an extended interview actually, with Sarah who's a lawyer senior lawyer from the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service, and she spoke at length about deaths in custody. Coming up next, the Doin Time show was meant to deliver an interview with the President of People with Disability Australia. Her name is Mariam, and she was meant to come on but has become ill. So a shout out to her. I will instead read out the media release of People with Disability Australia, and the President is scheduled to come on in 2 weeks' time on the 18th of March, and we will be speaking about the formal response to the Disability Royal Commission's final report delivered by People with Disability Australia. But in the meantime, I'll read out their very coherent media release, which will explain it all. So that media release is entitled, is actually dated, the 26th of February 2024. PWDA announced formal response to the Disability Royal Commission final report. People with Disability Australia is a national disability representative organisation led by and for people with disability. The organisation has released a response that reflects the most up-to-date and comprehensive views of PWDA members who are people with disability across Australia on key recommendations from the Disability Royal Commission. The report, a result of extensive consultations with PWDA's national membership, is a vital step towards advancing the rights of people with disability in Australia and realising a fully inclusive society. It highlights PWDA's response to the 222 recommendations made by the DRC and emphasises the urgent need for stronger human rights protections, governance reforms and systemic changes to end the violence, abuse, neglect and exploitation people with disability have and continue to endure. PWDA key policy positions. The report contains 19 policy position statements, including governance and rights protections. PWDA supports the enactment of a Disability Rights Act and a Human Rights Act, both developed in close consultation with people with disability. They also advocate for the creation of a National Disability Commission and the strengthening of disability discrimination laws. Housing. PWDA calls for an end to segregated housing and increased investment in options that promote independent living in the community. Education and employment. PWDA urges an end to segregation in education and employment, along with immediate action to support inclusive education and transition to open employment. Safeguarding and redress. PWDA emphasises the need for supported decision-making frameworks, the elimination of restrictive practices, and the establishment of a national redress scheme for people with disability who have experienced violence, abuse, trauma, neglect and exploitation. Nothing about us without us. PWDA President Mariaki Jonkers said, PWDA's response is a strong starting point for an ongoing conversation between the disability community and governments on how we ensure the Disability Royal Commission delivers genuine improvements for disabled people. Improvements that must also extend to the issues not adequately covered or addressed by the report. Issues like transport, psychosocial disability, hate crimes, income support, sexual and reproductive rights, healthcare accessibility, and post-secondary education, to name a few. Ms. Jonkers says this includes people with disability and their representative organisations having a formal role in sequencing and prioritising the rollout of reforms flowing from the DRC. She insists they must be at the forefront of every decision, policy and action that emerges from the DRC's recommendations. A voice of our own. PWDA CEO Sebastian Zagrella said PWDA will continue to tirelessly advocate until robust systems are established to safeguard and uphold the human rights of all people with disability in Australia. Until society is fully accessible and inclusive, we want a seat at the table to ensure the rights and choice and control of people with disability is front and centre in the reform agenda, and we are heard on decisions that will impact our lives going forward. Importance of PWDA's recommendations. The 19 policy positions put forward by PWDA are crucial for ensuring the human rights of people with disability are protected and promoted. They provide a roadmap for meaningful reform that addresses the systemic issues faced and violence endured by the disability community. Now is the time for action. With the Disability Royal Commission and NDIS review final report outlining a significant reform agenda, PWDA urges governments and policymakers to listen to people with disability. The time for change is now, and disability-led reform is crucial to ensure that the needs and voices of people with disability are heard and meaningful change delivered. And that's the end of the media release, and I'm hoping that we can have a look at that full PWDA report or response to the report next time, which will be in 2 weeks' time on the 18th of March. So to read the full response to the Disability Royal Commission final report, please visit the website, which is entitled pw.org.au, and here's the rest of the link, Disability Rights, Disability Royal Commission. And it's approximately 4:41, and we're going to be going out, well, we're not finished quite yet, but we're going to be doing a few announcements and another song.
"3CR is radical radio."
Through our on-air content and community structure, we promote real change for workers' rights, gender equality, environmental action, disability justice, and on racism and First Nations sovereignty.
Do you want to be part of real radical change?
We need you to subscribe. It's just $40 concession, $80 waged, $150 for a band or organisation, and $300 solidarity.
Call 03 9419 8377, that's 9419 8377, or subscribe online at 3cr.org.au/subscribe.
stand in solidarity with Palestine this Sunday.
With the most devastating attack ever launched on the people of Gaza, it's time for all of us to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people.
Israel has waged war on the Palestinians for the last 75 years. The Nakba, ethnic cleansing, occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem and Gaza. Israel has now imposed a total blockade on Gaza and declared war, stopping food, electricity and fuel and launching an all-out attack.
We have to mobilise to show our support for Palestine. 12 p.m, State Library, this Sunday.
Rally to demand freedom and justice for Palestine. No war on Gaza.
Free Palestine Melbourne is a 3CR supporter.
Disabled people are worth every bloody penny. I'm okay with spending money on the supports that we need.
There's more than 400,000 people who should be on the DSP but are on job seeker instead.
I've got a life to live. I've got commitment like everybody else in society.
The only way to provide meaningful support is stronger grassroots movements. These institutions are never going to be our saviour.
If everyone was the same, it would be a boring old world we live in.
We need to do a lot of work in this country around shifting community attitudes towards people that don't fit the white, able, straight, cisgendered person.
3CR. Stay tuned, stay radical.
And you're back with the Doin Time show. In case people have just tuned in, this is 3CR Community Radio, 855 AM on the dial, and this is the Doin Time show. You heard a pre-recorded interview, first of all, with Sarah from the Victorian Aboriginal Legal Service, and you heard lots of information and material about deaths in custody. You also heard some information and listened to some material in regards to the Royal Commission and the formal response from People with Disability Australia. And we're just about nearing the end of our show. You also heard a song by Paul Kelly called I Smell Trouble. And I will be next week delivering a repeat of the Doin Time show. And then on the 18th of March, I will be back and we will be starting off our show with People with Disability Australia talking about the Royal Commission, Disability Royal Commission and the final report. So until then, it's goodbye from Marisa. Stay tuned every Monday from 4 to 5 for the Doin Time show, including next Monday, because there'll be a repeat of some interviews from last week. And stay safe and look after each other. We'll be going out now with our theme song, Black Fella, White Fella, by the Rumpy Band, and we've got Climate Action up next. And also tune in March, pretty soon, to the International Women's Day broadcast and look at that very closely. Thanks a lot. Stay safe, be kind to each other. Bye.
Color, as long as you a true fella, as long as you a real fella. All the people of different races with different lives in different places. It doesn't matter what your name is. We got to have lots of changes. We need more brothers if we're to make it. We need more sisters if we're to save it. Are you the one who's gonna stand up and be counted? Are you the one who's gonna be there when we're shouting? Are you the one who's always ready with a helping hand? matter what you color, as long as you a true fella. All the people of different races with different lives in different places. It doesn't matter which religions, it's all the same whether ship is sinking